If you've just been watching for the last few minutes, you'll know we've been talking about this story regarding cladding today. A funding package worth about £4 billion is going to be spoken about by the government this morning. We said that we'd speak to the Housing Secretary, Michael Gove, who I'm delighted to say joins us live on the programme now. Good morning, Mr Gove. Good to talk to you about this. I know you're going to speak in more detail about this later on today, but where exactly is this money coming from?
From those who are responsible. We know that ever since the terrible tragedy at Grenfell, we've had a building safety crisis in this country. And we know that, in particular, what we need to do is to remove cladding from high-rise buildings. But there are other things that we need to do as well in order to make sure that people are safe. And ultimately, the key question is, who put that cladding up? Who was responsible for the state of those buildings? They are the individuals, they are the companies who should pay in order to ensure that that cladding is removed and that buildings are safe. We have had a situation in the past where some of the companies have been, to my mind, responsible and right in removing that cladding. Others have not. They have not shouldered their responsibilities. Now is the time when they should.
And how do you make them pay?
Well, we can make it clear to them that it's their responsibility, that it's wrong that leaseholders, the people who are in those flats, should pay. The leaseholders didn't create this problem. And in many cases, the sums concerned are sums that these poor individuals simply can't pay. But it is the case that companies which do have significant turnover, significant profits, significant dividends going out, they can pay. And we will make sure that they will. We hope that there will be a recognition of shared responsibility. I think that most people in the sector recognise that more needs to be done. But if necessary, then we can always use legal means and the ultimate backstop of tax in order to ensure that they pay. But what I want to do is to work with developers because, as I say, the overwhelming majority of people in the sector just want to work with us to resolve this problem.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about sort of how far you'd go, because your opposite number, Lisa Nandy, has said that this won't work effectively without a legal guarantee that leaseholders won't be liable for those costs. You seem to be saying that you're willing to go that far with these developers.
Yeah, we are absolutely willing to use legal tools in order to ensure that we're in a position to, if necessary, coerce, but we believe it's more important to seek to persuade and to work with. And I think the signs from people within the development and building industry are positive because, as I say, the overwhelming majority of people who work in that sector recognise that this is a shared problem and a shared responsibility. And because it's a shared responsibility as well, I'm looking forward to working with Lisa Nandy and Labour MPs as well to resolve this situation, because I think this is the sort of issue that goes beyond party politics.
Can I ask you about some of the other issues which some of these flat owners and those who live in these flats are facing? Because cladding is obviously the one that has taken the vast majority of attention, which everybody will understand. And there has been generally a sort of welcoming of this news, of this money and the pressure that will be put on developers. But quite a few people have been talking about some of those other problems, like defective fire doors, flammable balconies, buildings that are missing fire breaks because of non-compliant building works. What about those issues, which are also causing huge cost problems for many people living in those buildings?
You're absolutely right. Cladding is the first and most urgent issue, in cladding particularly on high-rise buildings. But there are other fire safety issues. And again, we want to work with building owners and developers to identify those issues and to identify a way of resolving them. My guiding principle is that leaseholders should not be held responsible for paying for work that was not their responsibility in the first place, and that it should be the owners of these buildings or those who are responsible for their construction that should pay. We are seeking to identify exactly which steps need to be taken building by building, because, again, I think it's important that we take a proportionate approach. We've got to make sure that buildings are safe, but it's also been the case that there's been something of an industry of looking at some buildings which are sort of mid-rise and assuming that work requires to be done there, which actually isn't necessary in terms of safety. But that industry has made a profit out of saying we need this or that additional step to be required. So we need to, as well as dealing with the really important fire safety issues, we need to restore a sense of proportion, because if we restore a sense of proportion, then that means that many individuals who at the moment are in buildings where it's very, very difficult to secure a mortgage can move on, get on with their lives, and we can make sure that they're no longer trapped by circumstances which are not of their own creation.
And in terms of the deadline, I've seen that the March deadline, is that right, to try and agree a plan? How realistic do you think that is, Mr. Gove?
Well, I think with goodwill on all sides, we can make rapid progress. But of course, there are ways of concentrating people's minds, and ultimately, you know, it's been years since the Grenfell tragedy. The Grenfell community have been fighting for justice for years now, and there have been individuals who have been trapped in buildings which are unsafe, and other individuals who found themselves incapable of moving because of the failure to resolve the situation. So I think that you know, we all need to do everything we can to resolve this situation and to secure justice as quickly as possible. But we mustn't make the perfect the enemy of the good. I'm very keen that we make progress, determined that we do so by March. I want to make sure that we work with the sector, and I'm sure it will be the case that in those conversations we can identify a way of working together to deal with this issue.
And when some of those developers might come back and say, hold on a minute, we were working within the regulations at the time, it's not entirely our fault. Will some of that spotlight fall on maybe local councils, for example?
Well, again, I wouldn't want to preempt what the conclusions are of the independent inquiry into Grenfell. And I think it's fair to say that responsibility falls on a number of shoulders. And indeed, we in government recognise that, you know, there were things that government got wrong in the run-up to this situation. I mean, as I say, I don't want to preempt the inquiry, but we have acknowledged that we have a responsibility. And that's why the government is contributing, the taxpayer is contributing, to a significant amount of work to help to make buildings safe. But because it's a shared responsibility, we want to make sure that developers and the property owners who have the big bucks do recognise their responsibility as well. And again, to be fair, there are many people within the sector who've already contributed significant costs to helping to deal with this problem. So we just wanted to make sure that the leadership shown by those enlightened developers is shared by everyone involved in this. And it's not just developers, of course, as well, who have a responsibility. We also need to think about some of the companies that were responsible for making this cladding in the first place.